apparently my status effect is excited. Hello everyone, Bront here. We're having some fun talking Godforge here in the new channel. We're going to be talking a little bit about these status effects. There's a lot of stuff to go over with the game. The first level of the alpha will be starting next week, and I am going to be in all three of those, so I will be playing the game as of next week. So hopefully I'll get a couple of videos in on how the game plays, some of my initial opinions, maybe some sample gameplay, maybe I'll even film, the initial start of it. I'll even see if I can stream some of this stuff on Twitch, on my regular Twitch channel. There should be links down below, probably in the pinned comment, because at the moment I can't bring links into the status. That'll get fixed eventually, but I just want to talk a little bit about these status effects, because I've talked about being excited for the game, and there's things that I'm excited for about Godforge, not just because it's going to be an interesting challenger to other games in the space, but I'm actually actively intrigued with some of the ways that they have made these status effects work. So I'm not going to go over every single status effect, but I've got a nice little spreadsheet here. And to be fair, Simon's done a video on this stuff where he's talked about all the different buffs, debuffs, and disables. But I just wanted to go over it because I've got the asset that talks about some of this stuff and point out some of the stuff that I am interested in, as well as some of the ways that I've heard some of this stuff is going to work. I certainly have some questions on some of those other things and how they are going to work. But I think it's going to be kind of interesting because there's an awful lot of these things, and a lot of them feel useful enough that it'll certainly be interesting to see when you're going to have to make choices, because not every champion is going to be able to do everything, and you're not going to be able to bring every single one of these buffs and debuffs and disables into a team. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see which ones are going to be the best in the game. Certainly that's going to take some gameplay and some time, and that's going to be balanced, hopefully. But also there's going to be, some interesting tactics that we're going to have, especially in this alpha that's coming forward. So let's hop on to status effects. All right, so here we've got the status effects stuff here. As you can see, there is buffs, there is debuffs, and there are disables. So buffs are, of course, going to be your classic buffs. You can see here I've got the accuracy up one there. You've got the classic debuffs, your accuracy down, that type of stuff. And then your disables, and I'll go over some of the ones that I find kind of interesting. I think this is kind of interesting, though, because you already have people that can deal with buffs and debuffs from a ability standpoint, where sometimes they can even do things like increase the duration of buffs or increase the duration of debuffs or reduce debuffs or cleanse. But making disable separate allows for example, champions to be immune to all disables, or to have the ability to simply cleanse disables but not debuffs, for example, which is going to give you an interesting variety in champion, as well as, make for some interesting gameplay. Now, I'm not saying they're necessarily going to be that distinct with every single character, but I think the opportunity to do so is going to be fun, and that's kind of interesting. As far as some of these buffs are concerned here, of course, we've got the accuracy up. You'll see some of these have 3 levels, which is definitely interesting, and I don't know if it's going to be a case of where if you can lay the first one or the second one or the third one, so a character maybe has to have the ability to lay one, or if, for example, if you get accuracy up level 1 and you get an additional accuracy up level 1, does it stack up to level 2? Or maybe if you have a 1 and a 2 stack, then suddenly that might stack up to a 3. I don't know. I'm actually kind of interested. Either of those makes for an interesting building block, and the same with the debuffs as well. Now, that does mean that there are some champions then that might actually be useful just because they can stack the second level up there and get you to the third level. On the other hand, it may mean that, just even the 20% accuracy might be good enough to be a good deterrent. So it's kind of interesting either way. You've got an attack up as well. I'm sure you've got attack down. In fact, you do have attack down right here. So 1, 2, 3. Barrier is going to be kind of like your classic shield. So that's going to have basically an HP level for the barrier that's going to act like a shield pretty much. Barriers can stack and be increased, which is interesting. I don't know if that means that barriers are going to all build, such as the shield growers, for example. That could be kind of fun. Or if there's going to be levels of that as well. I think that's kind of cool if they do all stack. That's certainly kind of interesting. I don't need to be drawing black stuff there. Um, Immortal. Immortal is kind of an interesting one. HP cannot decrease below 1, duration reduced when triggered. So basically, it is the unkillable of Raid, is a good example of that. But instead of being something where you are immortal and you are immortal until that debuff goes away or that buff goes away, it now will be a countdown. So if I get Immortal 3, it means I can take 3 attacks when I can drop me down below 1 HP. Now, I'm assuming that is an attack and not a hit. In fact, I believe he's clarified that that is an attack and not a hit. Now, there are some things where they're going to have to get more granular about hits versus attacks, because some cases it will be on a per hit basis. But in this particular case, it's a per attack basis, which again, fine, an interesting buff. Initiative up, that is effectively the increased speed. The initiative stat is your speed stat in this game. I actually kind of like the fact that it's only a 10, 20, and 30%, because if you let speed get too fast and too out of control, it becomes such an important stat that you'd never need anything else, or you need speed on absolutely everything. Now, there is some level you're always going to need speed on anything in this type of game, but if the other buffs are interesting and there's other uses for some of these stats that they're going to have as well, maybe initiative doesn't have to be the end-all be-all stat, like often speed has been on, honestly, most other games like this that I have played. So intercept, redirects and attacks. That's very interesting. So if you think about it in a raid term, UDK basically has a permanent intercept on him. So this would allow champion to put intercept on all of his allies, and then he just takes the next attack. Kind of cool. I think that's a fun way to have either single target protection or AoE protection necessarily. I think it's an interesting way to tank, and it's definitely different from the ally protection. But since it also gets reduced after it's triggered, it means that it has a one-time use, one-time redirect, and then it's done, which is also kind of interesting. It makes you think about using it. Mend, reduce bleed stacks by 1 and heal 10% of the max HP at the start of the turn. So basically that is kind of a continuous heal type thing. The fact that it reduces the bleed stacks is important. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Phoenix is your revive on death. 100% turn meter and 100% HP is kind of busted in some way. We'll certainly see how that works, but that's kind of interesting. We talked about protection. Well, there is your ally protection, 15, 30, 45%. A little strange it's not a 50% one, but to be fair, since you want all 3 of these out there, 15, 30, 45%, pretty solid. Radiance reduces and reflects percent of attack damage received. They don't see they have a percentage there. I assume it's probably 15, 30, 45. But that's kind of like protect, but also reflect, which is kind of interesting. Reflect damage has always been an interesting thing in these games. The reason it is always problematic is because if the enemies you are facing scale up in HP significantly over you, what can happen is reflect damage when an enemy gets it means that it is almost certain death for you to hit somebody with that type of reflect damage. Whereas when you have reflect damage on and somebody hits you, unless there's some other ability, such as, some sort of thing that does extra damage when that happens, it's rarely a significant amount, because even enough damage to maybe reflect 30% of the damage you would have taken, unless that would have killed you outright, is only going to be a minor amount against an enemy with, 10 times your base HP. So kind of interesting. Reflect is reflect the next non-resisted debuff. So that's basically a reflect debuff. I like that. That's kind of a fun one to think about. Resistance up, resistance and accuracy are certain stats. Retaliate is your counter attack, pretty standard there. Sharpen raises your crit damage and strong hit damage by 5, 10, and 15%. Now, strong hit mechanics in this game are going to be kind of interesting because they're going to be affinity based, but even non-affinity strong hits can happen. So if you don't have an affinity advantage against somebody else, you still have a chance of doing a strong hit. It's just a significant less chance of strong hits. That said, you can also crit and have a strong hit at the same time. So they're actually allowing you to do strong hit crit damage as well. And one of the things that can happen with strong hits is apparently increased accuracy can actually help you land strong hits. So accuracy can increase the amount of strong hits you get as well, making accuracy useful beyond just being able to land debuffs at 100%, which is kind of cool. So it's no longer this needs to be at the exact amount I need and no more. There's a benefit to having it higher. Plus, there's also now a benefit of having accuracy on damage dealers outside of course, them landing debuffs that may also be effective for them. Shield absorbs incoming damage equals the strength of shield before depleting HP. Shields cannot stack or be increased. Oh, okay. So barriers. So barriers are shields that can stack. I kind of find it interesting that they have the two of them separately, but it looks like a barrier is a shield that can stack and be increased, whereas a shield is a fixed shield, and then once it's gone, it's gone. Interesting distinction, but I kind of like it. It means some champions will have barrier, which will be more powerful, but if barrier is not as strong to start with, then you might have to grow it more. Who knows? Speed up increases the speed stat. Interesting. I thought that was actually the initiative, so I'll have to figure out what initiative versus speed is. That's kind of different. I'll have to actually see what that does. That's I thought initiative was kind of the speed stat, but apparently initiative is not. Oh, that's right. I remember this now. Initiative does deal with where you start, but initiative, I believe, also helps with your ability to gain favor so you can do your ultimates faster as well, if I recall. I'll do a breakdown. You know what? I will do a breakdown on stats a little bit later. So if I'm a little off on the stats, again, I'm refreshing myself on some of the stuff. And again, I'm just kind of getting into some of the stuff now because I'm starting to get hyped for the game because we've got the alpha coming out soon. So, gotta stop doing that. Stalwart, immune to disable. Duration is reduced when receiving a disable. So this effectively is a buff protection. Vanish, target cannot be directly targeted. So that's kind of your veil type stuff. AoE still should be able to hit a vanish champion. And ward is immune to attack damage. Duration reduced when triggered. So it's kind of your block damage stuff as well. Now, I didn't see anything that was immune to debuffs, but I did see the redirect. So that's kind of interesting. So my guess is the reflect here was non-resisted debuff goes there. So that's kind of interesting. So there may not be a pure resist debuffs, which is interesting. So anyway, with the debuffs here, we've got the accuracy down. You've got acid, which is one of your first damage over time. Disables armor sets and deals 5% max HP damage at the start of their turn. Deals doubled to barrier and shield. So disables armor set's interesting because that means that if you have an armor set that does something and you put acid on it, it no longer does. Whether or not that's going to be effective or not is probably going to depend on if the waves actually have gear sets on them. Because if they don't, that's going to be less exciting. The double damage to shield and barrier, though, of course, make acid an interesting way to burn through shield and barriers. They also help deal with armor, and then there's a 5% max damage. My understanding is acid is one of these things where basically it will tick down and deal this 5% damage flat, but every turn it ticks down. Ether burn, chance to increase the chance of a target to weak hit by 15 or reduce the divinity by 369% of all heroes on the team. So basically, this is going to cause champions to possibly weak hit more often, which could be very good for you. Attack down, pretty simple. Banish, enemy that dies with a debuff cannot be revived while it is on. So this is basically a block revive, but it's a debuff that allows you to kill somebody and block revive them. Blaze is kind of more of your HP burns type stuff. Blaze does AoE damage to everybody, but it's only, on one champion. So you can have a bunch of Blaze out there, then you might be able to do damage over time to everybody. Bleed is the third damage over time that I understand. And Bleed's kind of fun because it damages 1% of the enemy's max HP, stacks up to 10 times on subsequent applications. The other thing that's kind of interesting about this, I don't know how Blaze works as far as counting down the turns, but bleed doesn't count down. So if you get bleed on somebody, unless they mend it or find other ways to remove bleed, bleed is a permanent HP tick. So you can get up to a 10% per turn on bleed, And then if you have to remove it, then then there apparently Drac is one of the champions that can play with bleed, and he can remove enemy bleeds, but when he does, it hurts pretty bad. So I'm kind of excited to play with bleed. I kind of like the idea of a permanent max HP damage going on. And of course, I like the fact that these are kind of balanced. Acid deals with armor, does little damage on shield, is a 5%, but it's a single target and it's only that 5%. So bleed could eventually be more than acid, although it doesn't deal with the armor as well. Meanwhile, the blaze is an AoE. It can actually go all the way up to 6%, which means it actually can technically do more damage than acid. Does it to everybody as well, but it doesn't ignore the armor, doesn't eat the shields away as well. So all three of those debuffs seem kind of interesting. I think it's kind of cool. Block revive, that's your basic block revive. It's basically the equivalent of banish. Okay, banish is a little different because banish doesn't prevent them from being revived ever. Banish apparently actually adds to, basically it's a stack of banish. So you put 3 stacks of banish on somebody, for example, when they get revived, 1 stack disappears. So it's not a permanent block revive. It is a block revive until it gets removed enough to where they can revive them for their banish. Versus a block revive, as we've talked about right here, will simply block the revive. Again, interesting, different ways to deal with some of these debuffs. And it's actually kind of fun to read through some of these and bounce back and forth. Blunt decreases strong hit damage and critical damage by 10, 20, 30%. Basically an anti-critical hit, but anti-strong hit as well, which means it has usefulness against every champion, because again, strong hits can happen from any and every champion. Charm takes the next attack of the enemy that has placed this debuff. Duration reduced when triggered. I see. So that's kind of fun. So this is very similar to the, where is it here? The intercept. Except for this is intercept on an enemy. So I cast charm on an enemy tank, for example, or an enemy duker or whatever else, and then somebody attacks the champion that put charm up, and it does damage to that other enemy instead. Interesting. Kind of like it. Definitely different. Corrupt. The unit that places this debuff steals any buff received. Duration reduced when triggered. So basically, you put this on an enemy, and if they get buffed, you start stealing those buffs instead, and per buff stole stops and reduces the corrupt. Interesting. Curse. Reduces the incoming healing and shield barrier strength, 25, 50, and 75%. So there is no 100% heal reduction effectively, but I kind of like that. I like the fact that it affects shield and barrier strength as well. That I'm sure is going to be an interesting mechanic for some bosses that might be shield based, especially if they can re-pull up their shield repeatedly. Decreased defense, yeah. Drain. Attackers deal extra damage and heal for the damage. So it's basically a combination of weaken and leech in the raid terms, for example. Very, very interesting debuff. I think that's kind of cool. Hex. Allies also take 5, 10, 15% damage received. Halved is for AoE. Very, very fun. Good way to spread. So basically you hex people and they take damage combined with everyone else. Kind of fun. Decrease the initiative stack. Lock core abilities. That could be kind of fun. Lock passives. Lock ultimates. So there's 3 different ways to lock skills out. Kind of fun there. Resistance down. Definitely kind of a fun thing for, it's useful for landing stuff. And I think if the resistance play is interesting enough, here's the thing too. Remember I talked about accuracy helping with strong hits? If I get resistance down on the enemy, I'm more likely to strong hit them. So there's some interesting interplay with some of these debuffs as well. Speed down 1 through 3, that decreases speed. Terrify increases the divinity cost by 50%. Their divinity cost is for the ultimate. So basically it means the ultimate is going to be harder to use because it's going to cost more divinity. Very interesting way to lock out ultimates. I think that could be kind of fun. And if you can do that on bosses, it means you can lock out a boss's ultimate or, at least make it harder to grab. It's kind of interesting. And then, of course, vulnerable increases damage dealt by debuffs by whatever else percentage. So again, that's going to make you vulnerable to acid and blaze and bleed. So basically, it's kind of your poison sensitivity, but it's for all 3 debuffs. I think that's going to be kind of interesting, and I think there's going to be some fun champions that might make use of that. So let me go move my camera, and we'll talk about the controls. All right, so we got the controls, or disables, I guess they're called here, and there's some fun ones here. Confused. This unit attacks a random ally with its basic ability on its turn, doing 75% reduced damage. Now, that 75% reduced damage is pretty important because basically, if you didn't have that reduced damage, you would be killing your own team really easily, which is bad. So I've heard some horror stories about this in some of the podcasts they've talked about. This is a pretty powerful one. I like Confused, kind of interesting. Despair skips the next turn, cannot receive positive buffs or effects. Duration is reduced when attempt to receive a positive buff or effect. So basically, this nullifies receiving positive buffs or effects or skips a turn. But if you get buffed enough, you can kind of buff your way out of despair, is kind of how I read that. Kind of interesting. Freeze skips next turn. Increase incoming turn meter fill effects are reduced by 50%. So you basically become slowed in addition to missing your next turn while frozen. You know, makes some sense. Very thematic. Morph transforms the hero into a creature, wolf, bear, or frog. Heroes retain their stats but only have one ability. And I guess the reason there is these 3 of them. It will depend on certain champions will transform into specific ones. And some of them might be dangerous in certain ways. Like the frog is actually apparently going to have an ability that could be useful. So you have to be careful about who you turn into a frog versus who you turn into a bear versus who you turn into a wolf. Because you still give the enemy is not like sheep. This is not they are totally useless. They have an ability and it can help the other team. So the bear actually apparently can maul people. I don't know about the wolf, but definitely kind of interesting. I'm looking forward to playing with that a little bit. Petrify skips next turn. Increased affinity effects are reduced by 50%. So basically, while petrified, you cannot get your ultimate queued up faster. And in fact, it slows it down significantly, which is kind of interesting. Sleep skips next turn. Incoming damage from attacks increased by 30%. Duration reduced when attacked. So I kind of like this because it means that sleep could still make you lose a turn. But if you hit somebody that has slept, you're doing extra damage. So it makes up for the fact that you wake them up from a control, making the sleep debuff something very interesting. Plus, this probably stacks with some of the other damage increases we have here as well. So sleep could be very interesting. Stun is just your basic skips the next turn. It's kind of interesting. It means stun is one of the weakest stuns in the game. Kind of interesting. Other than sleep, maybe, but sleep increased damage by 30% could be very bad for your team. And finally, taunt. Attack the unit that placed this disable with its basic ability, doing 25% reduced damage. So that is a provoke, but it also reduces the damage that you take when you provoke somebody as well. And I like that mechanic specifically because one of the dangers of provoke is that provoke can get you killed if you provoke somebody that can just absolutely nuke your boss or your champion. So the ability to reduce the damage by 25% built into the taunt control, I think it's kind of interesting. And, you know, I find all of these kind of interesting. I can see where some of them are going to be useful. I can see where some of them might not be as useful. It's certainly going to be up to me to play and to suss some of them out and to see where you're going to need them. It's certainly going to depend on champion design. And honestly, some of the stuff is going to depend on where I'm at with stats as well when I'm doing some of these champion builds. Because if I don't need accuracy up is going to be a little less important than it might be otherwise if I did need it and it was something that was actually going to make the difference between me landing debuffs I want to and not landing debuffs I want to. And of course, we still haven't talked about things that are just direct effects that may also require accuracy as well, such as things like stealing Divinity, stealing turn meter, dropping turn meter, stuff like that. You know, when I say turn meter, I don't know how they're going to use the speed mechanic in a turn meter per se, but that kind of stuff is all very interesting to me. And just looking at these debuffs, they have done a very good job of making interesting debuffs. And while some of them are very standard, yeah, this is nothing special, but it makes sense to have, there's a couple of them in there that are very interesting, very unique. And my understanding of the starter champions is the starter champions are going to let you choose between, do you want to be able to do acid, burn, or bleed? So you're going to be able to pick a lane with your starter champion and go with that, which I think is going to be kind of fun. And I'm not sure which one I'd like to do. I kind of like the idea of stacking bleed. I think bleed's kind of fun. At the same time, the AoE damage of Blaze is very tempting as well, because I like AoE damage and I like damaging everybody on the enemy team. It's not a huge amount of damage, but you know what? Tick damage does help in a game like this. So again, I'm excited to try a bunch of this stuff out. Hopefully you're excited as well. Hopefully some of these status effects were kind of interesting for you. You know, hey, let me know what you think of some of this stuff. Let me know if some of these status effects are actually kind of interesting for you as well. Let me know if you like this kind of breakdown. If you want to see me do some more breakdowns on some of the mechanics of the game, I'm going to try to shoot as few videos as I can, or as many videos as I can, I should say, and get a few of these things out there before the alpha. And obviously once the alpha is in play, I'll get some gameplay for that as well. So appreciate you hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button. It really does help support the channel. You guys are absolutely amazing. Let's build an amazing Godforge community, because I believe you guys are some of the best folks in gaming, and I think that this community has the potential to be an amazing community. I've been a part of a really good community with the raid community, and I'm looking forward to building a nice one here with Godforge. So again, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and you guys have a wonderful day. And until the next video, I am Bront.